The great hall fell silent, not with reverence, but with a sharp intake of collective breath that stole the air from the very stones. Alpha King Kalen, his hand raised in the traditional toast to the moon and the hunt, faltered. The silver chalice, heavy with blood-dark wine, slipped from his grasp. It did not merely fall, it crashed against the flagstones with a sound like a shattering bone, a percussive crack that echoed the sudden, violent tremor that seized the king's formidable frame. He choked, a strangled gasp tearing from his throat, and pitched forward. His silver-white hair, a cascade of moonlight, fanned across the cold floor as his body convulsed. A dark crimson stain spread from his lips, pooling beneath him. But as the pack warriors surged forward, a wave of horror rippled through them, turning their cries to whispers. The blood, the sacred, silver-tinged blood of the royal line, was turning black. It coiled like a dying serpent on the stone, thick and vicious, absorbing the torchlight into its abyssal depths. The Alpha King was not wounded, he was being unmade from within. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Garrick, the king's beta, was the first to reach him, his powerful body a shield against the rising tide of panic. "Give him air," he roared, his voice a gravelly command that sliced through the fear. "Healers, now!" Two elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of 100 seasons, rushed to their fallen alpha's side. Their hands, gnarled and trembling, hovered over Kalen's body, seeking a wound, a break, some physical source for this cataclysm. They found nothing. His skin was unbroken, his limbs whole. Yet the black blood continued to seep from his mouth, a foul tar that spoke of a deep and terrifying corruption. One healer, a woman named Maeve, pressed her palm against the king's chest. Her eyes widened, and she snatched her hand back as if burned. "His spirit, it's being devoured," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There is no wound. This is not of the body. It is a rot of the soul." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all. A curse. A dark magic, potent and vile, had breached the heart of their pack and struck down their king. The great hall, moments before filled with the boisterous energy of the coming hunt, was now a tomb of cold dread. The scent of spilled wine and blood was overpowered by a new, terrifying stench, the odor of decay, of a spirit withering on its vine. Garrick knelt, his gaze fixed on the black blood. His loyalty to Kalen was absolute, a thing forged in the fire of a dozen border skirmishes and the quiet trust of shared command. Seeing him like this, so utterly helpless, ignited a cold fury in his heart. This was an attack, an act of war cloaked in shadow and whispers. "Find the source," he snarled to the guards, his voice low and dangerous. "Search the castle, the grounds, question everyone. No one sleeps until we have an answer." He looked at the healers, his expression grim. "Can you help him?" Maeve shook her head slowly, her gaze lost in the unfolding horror. "The herbs of the earth cannot mend a tear in the soul. Our lore speaks of such things, of curses that feed on the lifeblood of a wolf's spirit. They cannot be healed, only cleansed." An older wolf, hunched and scarred, one of the pack's lore-keepers, hobbled forward. His name was Valerius, and his eyes, clouded with age, held a flicker of ancient, terrible knowledge. "There is a prophecy," he rasped, his voice thin as autumn leaves. When the silver blood turns to night, the pack stands on the precipice of ruin. Salvation lies only with the child of the dark moon, the one without a scent, who is both the end and the beginning. A chilling silence descended once more. Every wolf in the hall knew of whom he spoke. There was only one among them without a scent, only one born under the eclipse that was known as the Dark Moon. A girl cast out to the furthest edge of their territory, a pariah whose very existence was a stain on their pride. Ilara. They called her the Cursed One, the Blight, the Omen. Her violet eyes were said to be portals to the void, her touch a source of withering. She was a ghost in their world, a creature of folklore used to frighten pups. Garrick's jaw tightened until the muscles corded in his neck. The prophecy was a thing of superstition, a relic of a more fearful age. To place the life of their alpha king in the hands of a cursed outcast was unthinkable. It was madness. Yet, as he looked at Kaelin's pale face, at the black blood that was the very symbol of their impending doom, he knew that reason and pride had fled. They were left with only desperation. "Where is she?" Garrick's voice was flat, devoid of hope. Valerius pointed a trembling finger toward the dark, brooding forest that bordered their lands. "Where she has always been, in the shadows, waiting." Garrick rose to his full, imposing height. He turned to two of his most trusted warriors. "You're with me." His gaze swept over the worried faces of the pack. "Secure the king. Let no one near him but the healers. We will explore this final path." He did not believe in prophecies, and he certainly did not believe in salvation from a curse. But he would drag the girl from her hovel by her hair if he had to. He would try anything, burn any bridge, to save his king. The forest was unnaturally quiet as Garrick and his warriors moved through it. The usual chorus of nocturnal life was silenced, as if the land itself held its breath, aware of the sickness that had befallen its master. The air grew colder as they approached the blighted patch of land the pack had unofficially ceded to Ilara. Here, the trees were twisted, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. It was a place where nothing wholesome grew. They found her hut nestled between two ancient, dying oaks. It was more a pile of sticks and mud than a dwelling, a testament to a life of utter solitude and rejection. There was no smoke from the crude chimney, no light in the single grimy window. Garrick's lip curled in disgust. This was the creature that was supposed to save a king? He hammered his fist on the flimsy door. "Ilara, by order of the Beta, show yourself." There was no response. He slammed his fist against the wood again, harder this time, making the entire structure shudder. "Do not make me tear this hovel apart!" The door creaked open a fraction. A single, luminous, violet eye peered out from the darkness within. It was a startling, unnatural color, like a shard of twilight, and it held no fear, only a weary and profound indifference. "The Beta has no authority here," a voice said, soft but clear, carrying a strange, resonant quality. "This land is a grave. You come to bury someone else?" Garrick shoved the door open, sending it scraping against the dirt floor. Ilara stood in the center of the small, bare room. She was thin, dressed in patched rags, her long, dark hair matted and unbound. She was a creature forged from neglect and scorn. But her posture was not that of a victim. She stood straight, her chin slightly lifted, her violet eyes meeting his without a flinch. And the old lore was true. As he stood before her, Garrick, whose senses could track a deer from a mile away, could smell nothing. No wolf, no human, no fear, no anger. It was like standing before a void, a chilling emptiness that unnerved him more than any display of aggression could have. "The Alpha King is dying," he stated, cutting straight to the purpose of his visit. "A curse." "The lore keepers say you are the only one who can help." Ilara's expression did not change. There was no flicker of surprise, no hint of satisfaction at the pack's sudden desperation. "The pack that left a newborn to die in the cold now begs a favor?" she asked, her voice laced with a quiet, cutting irony. "The world has turned inside out, it seems." "This is not a request," Garrick growled, his patience wearing thin. "It is a command. You will come with us." "I will not." The refusal was absolute, delivered with the finality of a closing tomb. She owed them nothing. Her life had been a testament to their cruelty. Every stone thrown, every whispered insult, every lonely, freezing night was a debt they had incurred, and she had no intention of allowing them to repay it with a demand for her service. "You misunderstand the situation, girl," one of Garrick's warriors snarled, stepping forward. "Your life is forfeit if you refuse." Ilara's gaze shifted to the warrior. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "My life has been forfeit since the day I was born. Your threats are old lullabies to me." Garrick held up a hand, silencing his man. He needed her, and a corpse would be of no use. He had to find a lever, a pressure point. "Think of it this way," he said, his voice dropping to a more measured, dangerous tone. "The Alpha is the heart of the pack. He is the lifeblood of the land itself. If he dies, the pack will fracture. Without his strength to hold the borders, our enemies, the feral claws from the east, the human hunters from the south, will descend upon us. We will be slaughtered. Your miserable patch of land will be overrun with the rest of us. Your solitude will end in a bloody death, same as ours." He saw a flicker in her eyes then, not fear for herself, but something else, an awareness. She was a part of this land, whether she liked it or not. Its death would be her death. "But," Garrick continued, pressing the advantage, "if you help, and if by some miracle you succeed, your status will change. You will be rewarded. A proper home, food, protection. You will no longer be an outcast." "I do not want your rewards," she said softly. "I want to be left alone." "That is no longer an option," Garrick said, his patience finally snapping. "The Alpha is dying. We believe your curse is somehow connected to the one afflicting him. If he dies, we will have our answer. We will consider your very existence an act of treason against the pack, and we will hunt you down and extinguish you like a candle flame. That is not a threat. It is a promise." He saw the trap closing around her. He was offering her two choices, both leading out of this hovel. One path was paved with a sliver of hope and a chance at a life she'd never known. The other was a guaranteed violent end. For a long moment she just stared at him, her violet eyes seeming to peer into the very depths of his soul. He felt a sudden, unnerving certainty that she saw all of his doubts, his desperation, his fear. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I will come," she said. "Not for you, not for the pack that named me cursed, but for the land that has suffered my presence without complaint." She stepped past him, out of the darkness of her hut and into the pale moonlight. For the first time, Garrick got a clear look at her. She was more than just thin. She was ethereal, her skin unnaturally pale, her movements possessing a strange, weightless grace. She was an anomaly, a contradiction of nature. And as they began the silent march back to the heart of the pack, Garrick felt a profound sense of dread. He was not bringing them a savior. He was bringing them a ghost, a mystery whose unveiling could just as easily be their damnation. The royal chambers were heavy with the scent of sickness and fear. Torches burned low, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Kaelin lay upon his great fur-lined bed, his breathing shallow, his skin the color of ash. The blackness had not spread from his lips, but the veins on his hands and neck were now visible as thin, dark lines beneath his skin, a creeping web of corruption. The healers stood by helplessly, their pouches of herbs and poultices lying untouched. When Garrick entered with Elara in tow, a collective gasp went through the assembled council members and guards. They stared at her as if she were a specter, their expressions a mixture of fear, hatred, and a desperate, fragile hope. They parted before her like a receding tide, clearing a path to the Alpha's bed. Elara walked forward, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. She ignored the hostile stares, the whispered insults. Her attention was focused entirely on the dying king. As she drew closer, she felt it, a palpable aura of negative energy, a cold, clinging presence that made the air thick and hard to breathe. It was a pressure she had lived with her entire life, a faint hum of wrongness at the edge of her senses. But here, concentrated around the Alpha, it was a suffocating roar. She could see it. It was not a sight for normal eyes, but a perception that existed somewhere between vision and feeling. Wisps of shadow, like strands of black smoke, clung to Kaelin, coiling around his limbs, sinking into his chest. One thick, dark tendril was wrapped around his heart, pulsing faintly with a malevolent, stolen life. She reached the bedside and stood for a moment, simply observing. Kaelin's eyes fluttered open. They were a startling silver, the color of the full moon on a clear night, but now they were clouded with pain. His gaze found hers, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition, of curiosity, even in his delirium. He had seen her before, a fleeting glimpse of the outcast girl scavenging at the edge of the woods. He had never imagined he would see her here, at his deathbed. "Who?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Elara," she answered, her voice soft. She reached out a hesitant hand, not to touch him, but to hover it a few inches above his chest. The moment her hand passed into the dense field of dark energy, she felt a jolt, a static shock of pure malevolence. An image flashed through her mind, a cavern deep beneath the earth, a dagger with a jagged obsidian blade, and the chanting of a voice she did not recognize. It was a ritual. The curse was anchored to an object. The vision was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her dizzy and nauseated. "What did you do?" Garrick demanded, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. "Nothing," Elara said, pulling her hand back. "I am listening." She closed her eyes, focusing her senses not on the physical world, but on the currents of energy in the room. She followed the shadowy tendrils that clung to Kaelin, tracing them back to their source. They didn't originate from within him. They were flowing into him from somewhere else. "It's not just him," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "It's in the castle. The stones themselves are sick." She placed her palm flat on the cold floor. The feeling was fainter here, but undeniable. A network of dark energy, like corrupted roots, ran beneath the entire structure, feeding the curse that was consuming the king. This was no simple hex. It was a sophisticated, deeply embedded magical attack. "It's a ward," she said, opening her eyes and looking at Garrick. "A powerful one, twisted to a dark purpose. It's drawing the life from him and feeding it into the earth, poisoning the heart of your territory." She moved her hand from the floor and, taking a deep breath, placed it gently on Kalen's forehead. His skin was cold, clammy. The moment she touched him, he flinched, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The shadowy tendrils around him recoiled from her touch, hissing like steam on hot coals. A small, almost imperceptible warmth flowed from her hand into him. It wasn't a torrent of power, but a quiet, steady trickle of clean energy, like a fresh spring cutting through stagnant water. For the first time in hours, a hint of color returned to Kalen's cheeks. His breathing deepened slightly. The effect was minimal, a temporary reprieve, but it was more than the healers had accomplished in a full day. Maeve, the healer, stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" "My curse," Alara said simply, without looking away from Kalen. "It makes me different. The dark magic doesn't recognize me. It sees a void, and it shies away." For the next several hours, she sat by his side, her hand resting on his brow. It was draining work. She felt her own energy being siphoned away, a constant, exhausting pull. The dark magic fought her, pushing back against her cleansing presence, but she held firm. During this time, Kalen drifted in and out of consciousness. In his moments of lucidity, he would watch her. He was a king, a warrior who had ruled for a decade through strength and will. To be laid so low, to be dependent on this strange, silent girl, was a new and humbling experience. He saw the way the others watched her, with fear and suspicion. He saw the exhaustion etched on her face, the tremor in her hand as she held it to his head. He was used to people who wanted something from him: power, favor, wealth. She wanted nothing. Her presence was a quiet, stubborn defiance of the darkness. "Why are you helping me?" he managed to ask during one lucid interval, his voice stronger than before. Alara's gaze met his. Her violet eyes were deep, unreadable pools. "Your beta gave me a choice between a chance at life and a certainty of death," she said, her voice flat. It was not a difficult decision. Her honesty was as sharp and clean as a shard of ice. There was no flattery, no pretense. It was a transaction. He grunted, a faint smile touching his cracked lips. "At least you are not a liar." He could feel her energy, a strange, calming coolness that pushed back the fiery agony in his veins. It was the first moment of relief he'd had since he collapsed. He also felt something else, a deep-seated loneliness in her, a void that mirrored the one the pack had created around her. They were two sides of the same coin. He, the center of their world, and she, the furthest outcast. And yet, here they were, their fates intertwined by a thread of dark magic. As dawn approached, Alara finally pulled her hand away, slumping back in her chair, her face pale and drawn. "I can't do more for now," she said, her voice faint. "I am only holding it at bay. The source is still active. It's growing stronger." Kalen was visibly better. The black lines on his skin had faded, and his breathing was even. He was weak, but the immediate threat of death had receded. Garrick stepped forward, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "You have done well," he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "What is the source?" "I don't know," Alara confessed. "It's old magic, deep. I felt an object, a blade, and a place, underground." She looked around the room, at the stone walls covered in tapestries depicting great hunts and ancient battles. "This castle has secrets. The source of the curse is hidden within them." Kalen pushed himself up on one elbow, his silver eyes sharp and focused despite his weakness. "The catacombs," he said, his voice raspy, "beneath the keep. They are sealed. No one has entered them in a century." Garrick frowned. "They were sealed after the Ironwood Rebellion. Your grandfather believed they were a security risk." "The Ironwoods," Kalen mused, the name of the rival clan sparking a thought. "They were known to traffic with hedge witches and forbidden lore." "It is a place to start," Ilara said, rising unsteadily to her feet. "The curse is tied to the lunar cycle. I can feel it. It gathers power from the moon. The next full moon is in 3 days. If the source is not destroyed by then, the curse will become permanent. It will not just kill you, it will consume your spirit entirely and sever your bloodline's connection to the moon goddess forever." The stakes were suddenly terrifyingly clear. This was not just an assassination attempt, it was an attack on the very soul of their pack. "Then we have no time to waste," Kalen said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old command. He looked at Garrick. "Open the catacombs, take her with you. Find this object and destroy it." He then turned his gaze back to Ilara. A silent understanding passed between them. He was placing his life and the future of his pack in the hands of the one person they had wronged more than any other. It was a desperate gamble, born of a curse that had left them no other move to make. The entrance to the catacombs was hidden behind a tapestry depicting the pack's first alpha receiving a blessing from the moon goddess. The stone door, sealed with rusted iron and a century of dust, groaned in protest as Garrick and his warriors strained to pull it open. A gust of stale, cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of damp earth and forgotten time. Ilara stood back, a simple torch in her hand. As the door opened, the oppressive feeling of dark energy washed over her, far stronger than it had been in the king's chamber. This was the heart of the sickness. "It's down there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Garrick grunted, peering into the inky blackness. "Stay close. If you are lying, I will leave you in this tomb." Ilara gave no reply, simply stepping past him and into the darkness. The torchlight flickered, casting huge, distorted shadows that danced like phantom beasts on the walls. The stairs were steep and narrow, spiraling down into the belly of the earth. The air grew colder, thicker with every step. The catacombs were a labyrinth of intersecting tunnels and burial niches. The air was dead, suffocating. The warriors, brave men who had faced down feral wolves and armed hunters, were on edge, their hands tight on their weapons. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water and the scuff of their boots. Ilara, however, seemed unaffected by the oppressive atmosphere. She moved with a purpose, her head tilted as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. She was not using her eyes to navigate, but some other, deeper sense. She followed the current of dark energy, the invisible river of malevolence that flowed through the tunnels. "This way," she would murmur, turning down a passage that looked identical to a dozen others. Garrick followed, his suspicion warring with a grudging respect. She was not guessing, she was tracking the magic with an unnatural certainty. Their strange procession delved deeper. They passed niches carved into the rock, holding the dust and bones of long-dead alphas and their kin. But the further they went, the newer the passages seemed. The rock here was not ancient and crumbling, but freshly carved, the tool marks still visible. "Someone has been here," one of the warriors whispered, running a hand over the rough wall. "And not long ago." The feeling of wrongness intensified until it was a physical pressure against Ilara's skin. The air crackled with power. They rounded a final corner, and the narrow tunnel opened into a large circular chamber. In the center of the chamber was a crude altar of black rock, and on the altar lay a dagger. It was a wicked-looking thing, the blade forged from obsidian that seemed to drink the torchlight. The hilt was wrapped in what looked like dried, blackened leather. Runes, ancient and sinister, were carved into the blade. The air around it vibrated with a low, hungry hum. This was the source. This was the anchor for the curse. Tendrils of pure shadow, visible even to the warrior's eyes, writhed from the dagger, sinking into the floor and walls, spreading like a cancer through the castle's foundations. "That's it," Ilara breathed, her eyes wide. "The anchor." "Then let's destroy it," Garrick said, stepping forward. "No, wait," Ilara cried, putting a hand out to stop him. "It's warded. Can't you feel it?" As Garrick drew closer, the air shimmered around the altar. A protective barrier, invisible but potent, crackled into existence. He pressed his hand against it and recoiled with a snarl of pain, a red burn mark appearing on his palm. "Dark magic," he spat. "It feeds on life. Touching the barrier will drain you." "How do we get through?" a warrior asked. Ilara was staring at the dagger, her mind racing. The vision she'd had, the chanting, the ritual. The power was not just in the object, it was in the intent poured into it. To break the ward, they couldn't use brute force. They had to unravel the magic itself. "The runes," she said, her gaze fixed on the blade. "They bind the curse to the Alpha's bloodline. It's a sympathetic link. As long as his blood flows, the dagger draws power." "So we have to kill the king to save him?" Garrick scoffed. "That makes no sense." "No," Ilara said, thinking aloud. "We don't have to break the link. We have to confuse it, give it something else to feed on. Something similar, but different." Her eyes fell upon her own hand. She was of the pack, yet not. In her veins ran the same blood, but it was marked by the dark moon, untouched by the pack's scent. A void. What would happen if she introduced that void into the equation? It was a terrible risk. The magic could lash out, consume her entirely, or it could do nothing at all. But it was the only idea she had. "I think I can break the ward," she said slowly, "but I need to get close to it. I need to touch the dagger." "The barrier will kill you," Garrick stated flatly. "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but my condition, it makes me invisible to this kind of magic. The ward is looking for a wolf's spirit, a life force it recognizes. It may not recognize mine." Before Garrick could protest, she took a deep breath and walked toward the altar. The warriors watched, their weapons ready, their faces tense. Ilara closed her eyes and focused on the emptiness inside her, the quality that made her an outcast. She wrapped it around herself like a cloak. She reached the shimmering barrier. Instead of pushing, she simply let her hand fall forward. There was no jolt, no pain. Her hand passed through the invisible wall as if it were nothing but air. A collective gasp came from the warriors. Garrick stared, his eyes wide with stunned disbelief. Ilara opened her eyes and stepped through the barrier, standing before the dark altar. The hum of the dagger intensified, the shadows around it writhing more violently. It sensed her, but it was confused. She was a presence and an absence, a life and a void. She reached out a trembling hand and wrapped her fingers around the hilt. The moment she touched it, agony erupted through her body. It was a cold fire, a pain that felt like her very soul was being torn apart. The dagger was not just an anchor for the curse on Kalen, it was a weapon designed to destroy anyone who touched it. But as the dark energy surged into her, it met the strange void at her core. and it faltered. The energy had nowhere to go, no spirit to corrupt. It was like pouring water into a bottomless well. A scream tore from Alara's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Yet she did not let go. She held on, her knuckles white, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was a conduit, a battleground for two opposing forces. On the outside, the shadowy tendrils around the chamber recoiled, thrashing wildly. "Now!" Alara shrieked, her voice strained. Garrick needed no other prompting. He lunged forward, swinging his greatsword in a shining arc. The blade, forged from meteorite steel and blessed by the moon goddess, slammed into the obsidian dagger. The sound was not the clang of metal on stone, but a deafening shriek, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. The dagger exploded in a shower of black shards and a blast of energy that threw them all backward. Alara collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The shadows in the room dissolved, the oppressive, malevolent energy vanishing as if it had never been. The air in the catacombs was suddenly clean, cold, and empty. Garrick scrambled to his feet, his ears ringing. He rushed to Alara's side. She was pale, motionless, a thin trickle of blood running from her nose. But she was breathing. He checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. He looked at the shattered remains of the dagger on the altar, then back at the unconscious girl. She had done it. The outcast, the curse, had faced down a magic that would have killed any of them, and she had won. He felt a profound and unsettling shift in his own soul. Everything he had believed about her, about the order of their world, had been proven wrong. He had seen her not as a blight, but as a shield. Upstairs, in the royal chamber, King Kalen bolted upright in his bed with a great shuddering gasp. The black veins receded from his skin, disappearing completely. He looked at his hands, at the healthy color returning to them. The fiery pain in his spirit was gone, replaced by a clean, aching emptiness. He was weak, exhausted, but he was whole. He was alive. The curse was broken. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he owed his life to the girl he and his pack had cast into the shadows. Alara awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of softness. She was lying on a bed, a real bed with linen sheets and a fur blanket, not the pile of straw and rags that had been her pallet for 17 years. Sunlight streamed through a high-arched window, warming her face. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the memories came flooding back, the catacombs, the dagger, the searing, soul-tearing pain. She sat up, her body aching as if she'd been trampled. The room was simple but comfortable, a small antechamber off a much larger one. A clean tunic and breeches were folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. Maeve, the healer, sat in the corner, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. When she saw Alara was awake, she put down her work and approached the bed. Her expression was no longer hostile, but hesitant, filled with a new, uncertain respect. "How do you feel?" Maeve asked, her voice soft. "Sore," Alara admitted, her own voice hoarse. "What happened?" "You broke the curse," Maeve said simply. "The moment the dagger was destroyed, the Alpha King recovered. You saved him. You saved us all." Maeve offered her a cup of water, and Alara drank it gratefully. The healer's hands were gentle as she checked Alara's eyes and pulse. "Your energy is dangerously low. You poured too much of yourself into that confrontation. You need to rest and eat." The kindness was more disorienting than the years of cruelty had been. She didn't know how to react to it. "Where am I?" "The royal wing," Maeve answered. "The Alpha King commanded that you be brought here and cared for." The king himself? The thought sent a strange flutter through her. She had only seen him as a broken man on the edge of death. What was he like now, whole and in his power. A heavy door opened, and Kalen entered the room. He was dressed in simple black leather, his silver-white hair tied back from his face. He was tall and powerfully built, moving with a predator's grace that even his recent ordeal could not diminish. His silver eyes were clear and sharp, and they were fixed on her. He exuded an aura of authority so potent it was almost a physical force. Maeve bowed her head and quickly scurried from the room, leaving them alone. Kalen pulled the chair up to the bedside and sat, his gaze never leaving her face. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. Ilara felt a sudden, unfamiliar urge to look away, to hide from the intensity of his scrutiny, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "The healers say you will make a full recovery," he said finally, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "I owe you my life." "The debt is paid, then," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "I was offered a choice. I chose life. As would anyone." "Perhaps," Kalen conceded, "but not everyone would have had the strength or the courage to face what you faced in those catacombs. Garrick told me what happened. You walked through a death ward and channeled a soul-killing curse. You are remarkable." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "For 17 years, my pack has treated you as less than dirt. We feared you, reviled you, for a mark you did not choose. We were blind, we were cruel, and I, as Alpha, was the most blind of all. I allowed it to happen. For that, I am sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. It was a simple word, but from a king, from an Alpha, it carried the weight of mountains. It was more than she had ever expected, more than she had ever dared to dream of. But it couldn't erase the scars. "Sorrow doesn't mend a broken bone," she said, her voice quiet. "And it doesn't warm a child freezing in the winter." Kalen flinched as if struck. He nodded slowly. "You are right. Words are not enough. Actions must follow. From this day forward, you are no longer an outcast. You will have a place here, in the heart of the keep. You will be honored, protected. You will want for nothing." It was a king's decree, a promise of a life she could scarcely imagine. A warm bed, plentiful food, safety, everything she had ever lacked. And yet, it felt hollow. "I don't want to be honored," she said. "I want to be understood. Why was I born this way? Why me?" Kalen's expression darkened. "That is a question I have been asking myself since I awoke." The dagger, the curse, it was too well planned, too specific. The use of a blood curse tied to my lineage, the location in the catacombs, this was not the work of an outsider. This was one of our own. His silver eyes narrowed. "And your curse, as we called it, the prophecy Valerius spoke of. It feels too convenient that the one person who could break the curse was the one person we had spent a lifetime alienating. It's as if someone wanted you kept isolated, weak, and ready to be used." The pieces began to click into place in Ilara's mind. Her birth during the eclipse, her lack of scent, the whispers that had followed her since infancy. It wasn't random chance, it was a design. Someone had orchestrated her entire life of misery. "Who would do that?" she whispered, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "Who could?" "Someone with access to the old lore," Kalen mused. "Someone who could influence the pack's beliefs from the very beginning. Someone who could place a curse on me and know of the prophecy that provided the key to breaking it." He stood and began to pace the room, his mind working. The timing is also suspect. The curse was set to kill me on the full moon. Why? To what end? He stopped and looked at her, a horrifying thought dawning in his eyes. The final stage of the blood curse ritual, to make it permanent and utterly shatter the bloodline's divine connection, it often requires a sacrifice. A sacrifice, Ilara repeated, the words tasting like poison. What kind of sacrifice? Blood of the cursed, Kalen said, his voice grim. The blood of one marked by an ill omen, on the night of the full moon. The truth slammed into Ilara with the force of a physical blow. Her entire life, her suffering, her isolation, it had all been a lie. She wasn't cursed. She was being cultivated. She was a lamb being raised for slaughter. Her only purpose to be the final, key ingredient in a ritual to destroy the king and his lineage. Her revulsion by the pack hadn't been an unfortunate side effect of her birth. It had been the entire point, ensuring no one would question her eventual disappearance or death. They made me this way, she stammered, her voice trembling with a nascent, towering rage. So they could kill me? So they could use you to destroy me, and in doing so, destroy yourself, Kalen corrected, his own voice seething with a cold fury. This changes everything. We are not dealing with a simple traitor. We are dealing with a master manipulator who has been playing a game with our lives for nearly 2 decades. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the true weight of the crown in his eyes. He was surrounded by smiling faces, by wolves who pledged their loyalty, but any one of them could be the serpent coiled at his feet. He was as alone as she was. "Who do you trust?" she asked, the question hanging between them. Kalen's jaw was a hard line. "Today, Garrick. My beta's loyalty is proven. And you." The words startled her. "Me? You barely know me." "I know that you had every reason to let me die, and you did not," he said. "I know that your life has been a lie crafted by my enemy. That makes you the only other person in this castle who wants the truth as badly as I do. We are bound by this, Ilara, whether we like it or not." He was right. Her desire for a quiet life had been burned away, replaced by a searing need for answers, for justice, for vengeance. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice hardening, the tremor gone. "We find the monster who did this to us," Kalen declared, his silver eyes blazing with a king's wrath, "and we tear them apart." The pact was sealed, not with a handshake or an oath, but with a shared, burning purpose. The outcast girl and the endangered king, 2 sides of a deadly conspiracy, now united against a hidden enemy. But as they stood in that quiet room, a new crisis was brewing. A guard burst in, his face pale with panic. "My lord, it's the seer! Lyra, she's thrown herself from the highest tower of the keep." Kalen and Ilara exchanged a look of cold, dawning horror. "Lyra, the pack's most revered elder, the one who interpreted the omens, the one who had been present at Ilara's birth and had been the first to declare her a curse. Their chief suspect had just silenced herself, or had been silenced. The path to the truth had just been covered in blood." And Ilara felt a terrible sinking feeling. She remembered the vision in the catacombs, the chanting voice. It had been old, it had been female, it had been Lyra. But as she tried to recall the memory, another detail surfaced, a fleeting impression she had missed in her pain. There had been a second voice, whispering alongside the seer's, a man's voice, deep and familiar. The conspiracy was deeper than they imagined. Lyra was not the master, she was a pawn, and the true player was still moving pieces on the board. The courtyard below the Seer's Tower was a scene of chaos. Lyra's broken body lay upon the stones, a silent, grim testament to the secrets she had taken with her. The pack crowded around, their faces a mixture of shock and grief. To them, Lyra had been a rock, a direct line to the will of the moon goddess. Her death was an omen of the darkest kind. Kalen stood on a balcony overlooking the scene, his face a mask of stone. Ilara stood beside him, a few feet back, wrapped in a borrowed cloak. She was still an object of fear and superstition to the pack below, and she had no desire to invite their scrutiny. "She was murdered," Kalen said, his voice a low growl that was for her ears alone. Lyra was old, but her mind was sharp. She was not the type to fall to despair. Or she was a fanatic who completed her part of the plan and chose her own exit, Ilara countered, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "She declared me cursed. She guided the pack's hatred of me for years. She was the architect of my life." "A key architect, yes," Kalen agreed. "But not the only one. Who did she serve? Who was the second voice you heard?" His question was a knot they couldn't untangle. The most trusted members of his council were down below, directing the guards. Garrick, Valerius the Lorekeeper, the heads of the great families. Any one of them could be the traitor. "He is watching us now," Ilara whispered, a shiver running down her spine. "Enjoying his work. He has removed a key witness and thrown the pack into turmoil. He is in control." Kalen's hands clenched into fists on the stone balustrade. "Not for long." He turned to her, his silver eyes burning with an intense fire. "The trust within my pack is broken. I cannot launch a formal investigation without showing my hand. He would simply burrow deeper into the shadows. We must do this ourselves, you and I." "How?" Ilara asked. "He knows the castle, the pack, our laws. We know nothing." "But you have a gift," Kalen said, his gaze softening slightly. "You see things others do not. You feel the currents of magic. Lyra's chambers, they will be sealed, but I can get you inside. Perhaps some trace of her, some object she held, will give you another vision, a clearer clue. And what will you be doing?" "I will be sowing discord," Kalen replied, a cunning, dangerous smile touching his lips. "Our traitor believes he is in control. I will make him believe he is losing it. I will question my council, put them at odds with one another. I will start a hunt for a phantom enemy outside our walls. I will make him nervous. A nervous man makes mistakes." It was a dangerous game, one of political maneuvering and subtle pressure, and it was a world away from anything Ilara had ever known. But the thought of uncovering the truth, of finding the face of the man who had stolen her life, was a powerful motivator. That evening, under the cloak of darkness, Kalen led Ilara to Lyra's chambers. The guards at the door, loyal to their alpha, stepped aside without question. The rooms were just as the seer had left them. They were filled with charts of the stars, bowls of scrying water, and the scent of dried herbs and incense. It was a place of knowledge and power. But to Ilara, the air felt tainted, stale with the residue of dark intentions. "What do I do?" she asked, feeling out of her depth. "What you did in the catacombs," Kalen said, his voice a quiet encouragement. "Listen, feel." Ilara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push past the clutter of the physical world. She reached out with her senses, searching for any lingering trace of the potent magic that had been wielded here. At first, there was nothing, but then she felt it, A faint, cold spot in the room, a place where the energy was thin and frayed. She walked toward it, her hands outstretched. It led her to a large, ornate chest at the foot of Lyra's bed. "Here," she whispered. "It's in here." Kaelin moved to the chest and lifted the heavy lid. It was filled with old scrolls, ceremonial robes, and trinkets of bone and crystal. Ilara sifted through them, her fingers brushing against each object, searching for the source of the coldness. Her hand closed around a small, smooth stone, a scrying stone, polished to a mirror-like sheen. The moment she touched it, a jolt went through her. A vision, sharper and more violent than before, flooded her mind. She saw Lyra standing in this very room, clutching the stone. She was arguing with a man who stood in the shadows, his face obscured. "The curse is not holding as it should." Lyra's voice was panicked. "The boy's will is too strong, and the girl, her presence weakens the anchor." The man's voice replied, deep and chillingly calm. The voice from her first vision. "Then we accelerate the plan. The chaos of the Alpha's death will be enough. On the full moon, you will bring the girl to the old altar. I will do the rest. Do not fail me, Lyra. My family has waited long enough to reclaim what is ours." The vision shifted. She saw the man's hand reaching out to take the stone from Lyra. On his finger was a ring, a heavy silver signet ring carved with the crest of a wolf's head biting down on a spray of ironwood. The Ironwood family. The vision shattered, and Ilara stumbled back, gasping for breath, the stone dropping from her hand and clattering on the floor. "The Ironwoods," she choked out. "The ring! It was the Ironwood signet!" Kaelin's face was grim. "Lord Titus Ironwood. His family challenged my grandfather for the Alpha position. They were defeated and swore fealty, but their pride has always been a bitter pill for them to swallow. He is a member of my council. He has been advising me, pledging his loyalty, while plotting to murder me." The betrayal was stark, chilling. "He spoke of his family reclaiming what was theirs," Ilara added. "This wasn't just about power. It was about revenge. He used you. He used Lyra. He used his position on my council to orchestrate everything." Kaelin snarled, the fury in his eyes like a gathering storm. But why would Lyra help him? Her loyalty to the pack, to the goddess, was legendary. Perhaps he offered her something she could not refuse, Ilara suggested. Or perhaps her loyalty was a mask, just like his. Suddenly, her blood ran cold. The full moon. The vision had been clear. "You will bring the girl to the old altar." "Kaelin," she said, her voice urgent, "tomorrow is the full moon. The plan is still in motion. Lyra may be dead, but he still means to use me for the final ritual." The realization hit Kaelin like a physical blow. The curse on him had failed, but the final part of the plan, the sacrifice, was still on the table. Titus didn't just want him dead. He wanted his lineage erased, his connection to the goddess severed, and Titus' own line installed as the rightful rulers. "He will come for you," Kaelin said, his voice low and dangerous. "He will try to take you." A deep fracture, a crisis of trust, opened up between them in that moment. Kaelin saw it in her eyes. She was a pawn, a tool, and now she was the bait. He had brought her from her relative safety into the heart of the danger. He had promised her protection, but he had made her a target. "You have to hide me," she said, her voice tight with a fear she hadn't felt before. This wasn't the blind hatred of the pack. This was the cold, calculating intent of a single, powerful man. "Hiding is not an option," Kaelin said, his mind already formulating a new, more dangerous plan. He will find you wherever you go. No, we will not hide. We will set a trap. A trap? He wants you at the altar in the catacombs. He shall have you, Kaelin declared, his eyes glinting like silver blades. But he will find me waiting for him. Ilara stared at him, horrified. He will have guards. He will be prepared. You are still weak from the curse. I will not be alone, Kaelin countered. I have Garrick and a handful of warriors whose loyalty is beyond question. But the plan will depend on you, on your courage. What do you want me to do? She asked, her heart pounding. I want you to let him take you. The words hung in the air, a demand so monstrous it stole her breath. He wanted her to walk willingly into the hands of the man who had orchestrated her life of pain, the man who intended to sacrifice her on a dark altar. The trust she had begun to build in him, the fragile bond forged in their shared crisis, shattered into a million pieces. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, you promised me protection. Now you want to use me as a sacrificial lamb, just as he did? I am not him, Kaelin insisted, taking a step toward her. I am trying to end this. It is the only way to draw him out, to expose him before the entire pack. And if your plan fails, she cried, backing away from him, if your handful of loyal warriors is not enough, I will be the one on that altar with his knife at my throat. You are asking me to risk everything, my very life, on your gamble. Her accusation struck home. He saw the terror in her eyes, the raw, visceral betrayal. He had made a promise, and now he was asking her to face her own murderer. It was too much. He had no right. But he saw no other way. Their enemy was too clever, too deeply embedded. Ilara, he started, but he had no words to mend the chasm that had opened between them. She looked at him, at the Alpha King who commanded legions, who held the power of life and death, and she saw just another man who wanted to use her for his own ends. He had saved her from the pack's scorn only to offer her up for a strategic sacrifice. I will not be your bait, she said, her voice cold and dead. She turned and fled from the room, leaving Kaelin alone with the echoes of his broken promise and the terrible choice that lay before them. The lowest point had arrived. They were separated by a chasm of fear and mistrust, and the full moon was rising. Ilara ran. She fled the royal chambers, the suffocating opulence of the keep, the whispers and stares of the pack. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from Kaelin, away from the impossible choice he had laid at her feet. She found herself in the castle's quiet garden, a place she had only glimpsed from a distance. The moon, one night shy of full, cast a silver glow on the carefully tended flowers and silent stone benches. It should have been peaceful, but to Ilara, it felt like a cage. She was a prisoner, not of the castle walls, but of her own fate. For a fleeting moment, she considered disappearing for good, running back to the forest, to a life of solitude. But she knew it was a false hope. Titus Ironwood would hunt her to the ends of the earth. She was the key to his ambition, and he would not let her go. She sank onto a cold stone bench, wrapping her arms around herself. The betrayal she felt was a physical ache, a cold weight in her chest. She had allowed a sliver of hope to enter her heart, a belief that in Kaelin she had found an ally, perhaps even a kindred spirit. And he had asked her to be a sacrifice. She had been a fool to trust him, a fool to believe that a king could ever see an outcast as anything more than a tool. As she sat there, lost in her despair, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Garrick. The beta moved with a quiet purpose, his craggy face unreadable in the moonlight. He did not speak, simply sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. "He is wrong to ask it of you," Garrick said after a long silence, his voice a low rumble. "After what you have endured, no one has the right to ask for more." Ilara looked at him, surprised by his perception, his empathy. This was the same man who had threatened to hunt her down, who had looked at her with undisguised contempt. "Then why did you not speak against him?" she asked, her voice sharp with bitterness. "Because he is also right," Garrick sighed, running a hand over his weary face. "Titus is a cancer in this pack. He has hidden his poison for years. A direct accusation would lead to civil war. The Ironwood clan is old and powerful. Many would flock to his banner out of loyalty or fear. Kaelin's plan, it is a terrible risk, but it is the only way to expose Titus's treason so completely, so undeniably, that no one can stand with him. He must be caught in the very act of his sacrilege." He turned to look at her, his eyes earnest. "The Alpha did not make this choice lightly. I was there when he decided. I saw the cost in his eyes. He is asking you to be the bait in his trap, yes, but he is also placing himself in that trap right beside you. He intends to be the steel that springs it shut." Ilara considered his words. She thought of Kaelin, of the fury in his eyes when he learned the truth of her life. Was it possible that his cold, strategic demand was born not of callousness, but of a desperate king's last, terrible resort? Was he truly willing to risk everything alongside her? Garrick stood. "The choice is yours, Ilara. No one will force you. If you wish to flee, I will not stop you. I will even help you. But Titus will not stop hunting you. And our pack will likely bleed." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the rising moon. She was trapped between two impossible futures: a life on the run, forever looking over her shoulder, or a single night of unimaginable terror that held the only chance for true freedom. She thought of the 17 years of misery, of the architect of that pain, Lord Titus Ironwood. The rage she felt, the burning desire for justice, was a fire in her belly. To let him win, to let him fracture the pack and continue his reign of shadow and deceit was unthinkable. Her life had been defined by the actions of others. For the first time, she had a choice. A terrible, terrifying choice. But it was hers. She could be a victim who ran, or she could be the weapon that brought down a tyrant. A cold resolve settled over her. She would not run. She stood, her decision made, and walked back toward the keep. She found Kaelin in the strategy room, poring over maps of the catacombs with Garrick and a small handful of grim-faced warriors. When he saw her enter, he looked up, his silver eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize again, but she cut him off. "I will do it," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I will be your bait." A wave of relief and something else, a profound, humbling respect, washed over Kaelin's face. He nodded slowly. "The risk." "I know the risk," she interrupted, "but the man who did this to me will not win. He will not get away. Tell me the plan." The plan was simple, and for that reason, terrifying. Ilara would allow herself to be seen alone, vulnerable, in the castle gardens after moonrise. Titus's men would take her. They would assume she was running, an easy target. Kaelin and his warriors would be hidden in the catacombs near the sacrificial chamber, waiting. They would strike the moment Titus began the ritual, catching him red-handed. The fate of the pack rested on a knife's edge, on perfect timing, and the courage of a girl who had every reason to say no. The full moon rose, huge and luminous, painting the world in shades of silver and black. Ilara walked into the garden, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves was a promise of violence. She did not have to wait long. 3 figures melted from the darkness, their faces hidden by cowls. They moved with a silent, deadly efficiency. Before she could even feign a scream, a hand was clamped over her mouth, and her arms were pinned behind her. She was dragged back into the shadows, through a hidden postern gate, and down a secret stairwell that led directly to the lower levels of the catacombs. They moved quickly through the labyrinthine tunnels, finally emerging into the circular chamber with the black stone altar. Lord Titus Ironwood stood waiting for her, bathed in the eerie glow of a single torch. He was a tall, imposing man with cold, calculating eyes and the silver signet ring gleaming on his finger. He smiled when he saw her, a thin, cruel slash of a smile. "The Cursed One," he said, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. "How fitting that the pack's blight will be the instrument of its purification. Lyra spoke of your usefulness." He dismissed his men. He was arrogant, so certain of his victory that he felt no need for guards. He believed her to be nothing more than a terrified, helpless girl. Ilara's fear was a cold, sharp thing, but beneath it, her rage burned hot. She met his gaze without flinching. "You will not succeed," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but filled with defiance. "Kayla knows." Titus laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The Alpha knows nothing. He is chasing phantoms on the border, thanks to my counsel. By the time he returns, his connection to the goddess will be severed. The pack's spirit will be broken, and I will be here to pick up the pieces. My bloodline, the true bloodline of this pack, will finally rule again." He drew a long, cruelly curved ritual knife from his belt. It was not the obsidian dagger, but its purpose was the same. He advanced on her, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. "Do not be afraid, little curse. Your end will give this pack a new beginning." He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and dragged her toward the altar. This was it, the moment of truth. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end, praying that Kalen's timing was perfect. Titus forced her to her knees before the cold stone. He raised the knife. "For the glory of the Ironwood name!" he snarled. "For the pack!" a voice roared from the shadows. Kalen exploded from a hidden alcove, a silver blur of righteous fury. At the same time, Garrick and the loyal warriors emerged from other tunnels, their swords drawn, blocking the exits. Titus spun around, his face a mask of pure shock and disbelief. "You? How? Did you really think I would let you harm her?" Kalen growled, his silver eyes blazing. He was no longer a weakened king recovering from a curse. He was the Alpha in his full, terrifying power. "You have betrayed your pack, betrayed your Alpha, and conspired with darkness. Your treason ends tonight." Titus, realizing he was trapped, let out a desperate, enraged roar. He shoved Ilara aside and lunged at Kalen, his ritual knife held like a dagger. He was a powerful warrior in his own right, but he was no match for a true Alpha, especially one fueled by a cold, righteous rage. Their blades met in a shower of sparks. The chamber rang with the sounds of their battle, a whirlwind of steel and fury. While they fought, Ilara scrambled away from the altar. She was not a warrior. She could not help with a sword. But the dark magic of this place, the residual energy of the first ritual, still clung to the stones. And she was not just a cursed girl anymore. She was something more. She closed her eyes and reached for the power inside her, the quiet void that had been her shield. But this time, she did not use it to defend. She pushed it outward. A wave of pure, cold energy, the essence of the dark moon, radiated from her. It was not a violent blast, but a wave of absolute nullification. The torch on the wall sputtered and died, plunging the room into darkness. The faint, malevolent aura in the chamber was extinguished. Titus, who had been channeling some of the chamber's dark energy to fuel his frenzy, faltered as his unnatural strength vanished. In that moment of hesitation, Kalen struck. He disarmed Titus with a powerful blow, sending the ritual knife skittering across the floor. He slammed his fist into Titus's jaw, sending the traitor crashing to the stone, dazed and defeated. Garrick and his men quickly subdued him, binding his hands. Kalen stood over his fallen enemy, his chest heaving. He turned to look at Ilara, who stood in the darkness, the faint silver light from the tunnel entrance limning her form. They had done it. The trap had been sprung. The traitor was caught. They stood together, the king and the outcast, united by a bond forged in lies, betrayal, and a desperate shared fight for survival. The confrontation was over. The true alliance had been cemented, not in words, but in the crucible of battle. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Lord Titus Ironwood was dragged from the catacombs and thrown before the entire pack who had been gathered by Garrick's secret order. Kalen, his face grim, his voice ringing with the unassailable authority of the Alpha, laid bare the full extent of Titus's treason. He spoke of the curse, of the plot to sever the pack's connection to the goddess, of the revered seer Lyra's complicity. And then he told them the truth about Ilara. He told them how her curse was a lie, a label engineered by Titus and Lyra to create a perfect, isolated sacrifice. He told them how this girl, whom they had scorned and tormented for 17 years, had been the only one with the courage and power to break the curse and save their king. A great, collective wave of shame and horror washed over the pack. They looked at Ilara, who stood beside Kalen on the dais, not behind him, her head held high, her violet eyes clear and steady. They did not see a blight or an omen, they saw a savior they had nearly destroyed. The Ironwood clan, faced with the undeniable proof of their lord's treachery and the Alpha's righteous fury, fell to their knees and begged for mercy. Kalen was ruthless in his justice, but measured in his judgment. Titus and his closest co-conspirators were executed for high treason before the sun rose. The rest of the clan was stripped of its titles and lands, their power broken forever. But they were allowed to live, to earn back their place in the pack through generations of loyal service. The main conflict was resolved. The cancer had been cut out, but the wounds to the pack's soul remained. The laws and beliefs that had allowed such a betrayal to fester, that had allowed a child to be so cruelly cast out, could not stand. In the days that followed, Kalen, with Ilara always by his side as his most trusted advisor, issued a series of new decrees. The old, fear-based superstitions were abolished. The reliance on a single seer was ended, replaced by a council of elders who would interpret the will of the goddess together. He declared that no member of the pack would ever again be judged by the circumstances of their birth, but by the content of their character and the strength of their loyalty. A new covenant was being forged, one based on truth and mutual respect. One evening, a week after the confrontation, Kaelin found Alara standing on the balcony overlooking the valley, the same balcony where they had watched Lyra's body being discovered. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "It's strange," Alara said, not turning as he approached. "For my entire life, I dreamed of being invisible. Now, everyone sees me. They bow, they offer me gifts, they look at me with awe." "It is what you deserve," Kaelin said, coming to stand beside her. "They are not in awe of a curse. They are in awe of your strength." "It doesn't feel like my strength," she confessed. "It feels like something that happened to me. My life has been a story written by other people. I just want to write my own." Kaelin was silent for a moment, watching her profile in the fading light. He had offered her a home, safety, honor, but he knew it was not enough. He had to offer her the one thing she had never had, a choice, freely given. "The pack needs you, Alara," he said, his voice soft. "Your wisdom, your unique perspective, it is the antidote to the poison of our past. I need you." He turned to face her, his silver eye sincere. "I want you to stay, to stand by my side, not as an advisor, not as a savior, but as my equal, as my Luna." It was not a command, it was a question, a plea, a heartfelt request from a king who had realized his throne was meaningless without the right person beside him. Alara looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw not just the Alpha King, but the man who had admitted his faults, who had risked his life for her, who saw her not for the curse others had given her, but for who she truly was. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for 17 years began to recede, replaced by a warmth she had never known. "The pack will not accept an outcast as their Luna," she said, testing him. "Then they will have to learn," Kaelin stated, his conviction absolute. "I will be their alpha. You will be their heart. Together, we will teach them." She searched his eyes and found no deception, no hidden agenda. Only a raw, honest vulnerability that mirrored her own. She had a choice. She could leave, find a quiet corner of the world and write her own story alone. Or she could stay and write a new story for an entire people, with him. She gave him a small, hesitant smile, the first genuine smile of her life. "All right, Kaelin," she said, "let's teach them." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. As he did, a strange, wonderful thing happened. A scent, faint but distinct, rose from her skin for the first time. It was not the scent of a wolf or a human, but something entirely new, something uniquely hers. It smelled of moonlight on quiet snow and the deep, rich earth of the forest. It was the scent of belonging. Kaelin smiled, a true, warm smile that transformed his stern face. "Welcome home, Alara." They stood together on the balcony, hand in hand, watching the first stars appear in the twilight sky. The king who had been saved and the girl who had been cast out, their two broken halves made whole. A new era for the pack had begun.